Hello and welcome to Mooks and Monsters. I'm Rob Ward.
And I'm Tim Niederreiter, and this is episode 109 of the podcast.
Today we are going to be we're continuing our discussion about creating a scenario for your players. This section is called settings, plural. Now, the setting is places or a place in your world because it really has a significant impact on your players and how they're going to go about things. The way that your character's party might operate in a government building is a lot different from the way they might operate on a ship in the middle of the sea.
Yes, and likewise a dark forest versus an urban center, that kind of thing. But though the dark forest urban center, that's more of a regional kind of thing and it's more that's more equivalent to a whole world as opposed to a single location. We're talking more about locations. So though having to play, though in some cases, certain games like D&D, you're going to have those, with those random encounter tables. You're walking through the hillside, you're going to run into goblins or ogres or whatever based on some chart. In some cases, and that is also kind of what we mean, but it's not as specific because usually if you're a transitional setting like that, yeah. Anyway, we're getting in the weeds. Yeah, it's different.
Yeah. So first off, when we have our previous episodes, we have our plot, we have our ideas. So when we have our setting, this really we're getting more into a flavor, but we're still in the realm of the plot because what I tend to do when I'm creating a scenario is I tend to focus on one location to start. And from there, I connect it somehow to other locations.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. It's this way you have it's almost a spider web.
Mm-hmm.
You have your middle ground. For example, I started this scenario that I'm running currently at a circus in Wisconsin Dells, Wisconsin. Because that's where the major plot point happened. And from there, I was able to connect it to the lake nearby. I was also able to connect it to a police station. Just when you're having settings, when you have areas that your party needs to go to, there needs to be a why they would go there.
Yeah, and that's kind of the connection. The connective tissue is not so much locational as it is purposeful. So, like you said, the police station. I mean, obviously, if you've got criminal horror stuff going on, the police station is going to be important.
Mm-hmm.
So that's connected by virtue of the plot to the circus, when it would not necessarily be geographically next to it or whatever. Whereas the lake is connected geographically. So there's these different kinds of connection you can have.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's very important to have that distinction between them.
Mm-hmm.
For example, let's start off with, the circus. Why the circus? Because that's where the major plot point that this entire thing revolves around happens. Okay, the lake. Why the lake? Well, that's because the monster we're seeing going into the lake, and there's a whole bunch of cops around it. Okay, good. Next up is the police station. Why the police station? Because those are the people you're going to be working with eventually.
Right. It makes a lot of sense to have an idea, a purpose behind each location, like you're saying. Go on.
Mm-hmm. And it doesn't have to be some super complex thing either. If anything, that'd make it a little more difficult.
Simple's better.
Totally. When I was running the wrestling game, I had these locations pretty much set up because it's like, okay, here's this hotel. Why this hotel? Because that's where everyone else is staying. There's a liquor store. Why this liquor store? Because our characters are majorly big drinkers. There's a bar. Why a bar? Same reason as above.
Yeah, see above. Yeah, it's like it's also cool because you can rope these things in, but or you can let the PCs rope them in, and that's like what you're talking about here is where the player characters kind of by their nature are going to be interested in these places. It's like, well, you're playing like in the D&D scenario, the classic D&D scenarios. your players are vagabonds, murder hobos at worst, but they're traveling adventurers in a lot of cases. So the inn is important because that's where they're going to stay. They don't have homes that they're going to stay in. But in a game where you are playing in a more modern setting or a setting where the players have more established holdings, then that's going to be an important place. Often enough. If your players own a castle, they're gonna go to the castle sometimes, and stuff will happen there sometimes. It's important to know things about it. And I guess that's really what setting is important, is to know the details, and not necessarily a lot of details, right? Simple is better, but to know enough about a place that you can talk about it as the narrator, the game master.
Well, the setting is really where the mood and the feeling of the plot of the game really comes into full force, because this is what you see. This is what you can easily describe. I tend not to describe scenery as much. I'm not really. You can take it into the. There's game masters that are Tolkien-esque, and they describe every little crease. And then there's people like me that Vonnegut. You get enough to know what you're dealing with.
Yeah, and it's interesting because even if you're going to do like you said, the Vonnegut style, the more minimalist description style, it's important that the PCs know the things that are around them. At least they should be able to ask about them. You want to give them something to grab onto in some ways, so that they know where they are. And sometimes that's as simple as saying the name of the place. You're in the police station. There are cops around. It gives you, depending on how easily how archetypal your place is, right? It can really define what the players are going to see as tools there. I think that's really important, because a lot of the time the setting will give players additional ways to solve problems without you necessarily thinking about it.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you give them, if you have and so if you have a place that's, you're at a newspaper or something, a printing press type thing, where they're actually printing newspapers, whatever. That's going to present different opportunities than a police station or a circus. And that can be very interesting. Yeah.
And the way that you describe it is also going to influence that as well. Say that we have a printing press, and this is an older building. This is a warehouse that's been in existence for a long, long time. The equipment's a little older. There's like 5 or 6 people working the press itself, and another 3 binding it up and ready for pickups. As opposed to, this is a major facility, very modern, very state of the art, and this is for one of the biggest newspapers in the country, and it's really busy, and there's people all over the place just hauling thousands and thousands of papers all across. So something like that would those two feelings automatically put you into a different pace, because the older one's going to be a little slower, and you might be able to talk to someone a lot easier than you would the major printing press.
Right. So the major difference is that you have a difference and there's all kinds of differences. We don't need to get into specifics because that would take forever and not really do much benefit. You want just tweaks to the idea of, this is a newspaper. What era the newspaper is in really matters, but then obviously age and stuff like that, like you mentioned.
Age, size, condition,
sophistication, all that stuff. Yeah.
Kind of going back to settings. When we were mentioning, I'm sorry, I just had a brain fart there.
The flavor of the setting, the tone.
Yeah, going back to the flavor and the settings. It really gives your game a lot more life when you can kind of convince the players that, they're going to go somewhere that you weren't expecting, but you actually have in your mind.
Oh, yeah. So when your players go somewhere new, you have details about it that they wouldn't necessarily expect you to have because they think you're winging it, or you may be winging it for real.
Yeah. They don't expect this thing to they might think, I'm going to throw them a curveball, but they're delighted when they realize, no, this is a fully fleshed out area. Yeah. I had an incident like that at my game weeks and weeks ago when a player was went to a psychic, and they saw a gun in the vision, so automatically they went to a gun store to find a gun, and I had this gun store all ready for them. And I described how the guy is a little older, and there's all this like military surplus around the place, and it really is one of those shady gun dealers that's willing to do stuff under the tables.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, so it's a whole identity to this location. Yeah, and you worked that all up ahead of time. Is that what you're saying?
I had like an idea. I had a name. I had a idea for the owner, and I had kind of the feeling, because a lot of times when people go to a location, you have the ability to have a archetype in mind. We've all been to the dive bar. Most of us have been to a dive bar that's got all the beer logos around the place. It's not that well kept, although it's still very popular. We've all been to the hole in the wall cafe. We've been to the really nice mall in the suburbs that's just a little really too plastic. In Minnesota, that's known as a diner.
That's a town, by the way, for people who don't know.
Yep, it's a town where the nickname for them is cake eaters, because that's where all the kind of the yuppie suburbanites live. Anyway, but
other than alienating local yuppies.
Yeah. Well, other than that, we have these ideas in our minds, and we're able to. It's okay if you have a location that you didn't really flesh out to fall back on these archetypes. And if it's someplace that's totally new, you could take a time and instead of saying, "Oh no, there's no such thing as a haberdashery here," you can make it so you can put it in the next town over. Yeah. So that you can have some time to okay, haberdashery. That's a hat place. Okay.
Right. Yeah. or the what is it? What do you call the shoe repair shop? I don't remember.
Oh, a cobbler?
Cobbler, yeah. That's the cobbler. But that's the funny thing is but there's also lots of there's lots of businesses and locations that aren't really in existence anymore. The tanneries aren't real. I mean, I guess there are tanneries, but like an old school tannery would be is like a really creepy place, really gross place, right? I'm not sure what they're like these days, but you'll go back to any period, early modern or pre-modern period, and the tannery is like a place of madness and horrible stench because it's so poisonous.
And
or the lighthouse and or any of these things. Yeah, there's different moods.
Well, that mood also like the era of the place will vary very much differently from and change your mood. For example, a slaughterhouse.
Oh God!
Now, what type of slaughterhouse are we talking about? Are we talking like Upton Sinclair's The Jungle Slaughterhouse, where there's just all this filth and disease and people are killing animals with sledgehammers? Or is this like a modern, very sterile, very clean slaughterhouse where it's still like a whole bunch of animals dying on an assembly line, but everybody's in a white lab coat. Everyone's just very, it's really,
it's actually paying attention to not spreading disease through the meat, that kind of thing.
Yeah. It's very sterile. And so actually, those two will change the mood of your setting much differently.
Absolutely. And what if? And actually, you're familiar with this mildly, but we never actually went to this place, one of these places in the game with General Mongoose a while back. But there was the Butcher Church, and you can bet that they've got elements that still involve butchering animals, I would imagine.
Oh, totally.
And they're a church, so that's another kind of slaughterhouse right there. Anyway, just came to mind. So anyway, there's and that's the other thing is that sometimes there's going to be salient details that are going to be important to your plot, but a lot of the time it is more mood, and you're doing a very good job explaining that. As far as plot details, they don't even have to be out in the open, but it's important that there be a clue that there's something to ask about. I think that's an important thing with settings. Is you want to make the characters kind of interested or at least some of the players should be at least a little interested in your setting if there's something important to find there. If that makes
absolutely.
sense, like because it's like an adventure game, like one of these old adventure games, like a King's Quest on a computer. It's a very similar kind of thing, where if the players don't ask a question, they're not going to get an answer in a lot of cases. So you want players to see things that are going to raise questions in their minds, and that can be through character, but it can also be through character or plot, but it can also be through setting, and a combination of them is also really effective. Because if you're looking through, if you're in a slaughterhouse and you're looking for a monster, that's different than if you're in a slot, and so you're going to look for clues to a monster being in the slaughterhouse. Yeah, I'm already grossing myself out, but that was actually a scenario in one of my games. Or it was an old school. It was an old school, like actually no, it was a meat packing plant, but there was a monster hiding. The places we send our players. Anyway, the places we go with them.
And I think we've kind of
we're out of things to say, I think.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we can nice recap here might help.
Yeah.
Like the way I do it personally, it's you have your major area, like where the things start, where things really revolve around. And from there you come up with a reason why people might go to an area. Mm-hmm. If they're major plot point areas, you really need to have a good, solid reason why people are going to go there. Knowing that also there's going to be places that your players are just going to miss, even though you spent like an hour making every building in the room.
On this block, every building's important. Every
building in the fucking city, and you just are like, oh, okay, everything's just out the window now. Yeah. But it happens. So you have that spider web, and you also have those. Yeah, in your head, you have these ideas for just Joe's Bait Shop. It's run by a grizzled old fisherman that likes to talk, and they have cheaper than usual prices, and it's right by the lake. Boom.
And he loves catfish. Anyway,
catfish hunter.
Yeah. So, what was there was one other thing I wanted to add is along with the spiderweb thing, just something I forgot to mention earlier is that you don't want to put too many of those scenarios in there where you go left and right, and you get a completely different story if you go right than if you go left. It's important. Yes. I mean, I think when you build a game, most of the time, sometimes you want to do that, but most of the time you want to kind of use most of the material. It's a design concept that I think is pretty sound. Is you don't want to diverge completely too early, at least, if that makes sense in a scenario, because then you're creating more work for yourself in some ways. And that's not as serious of a problem in an RPG, because the work is actually pretty, depending on how many rules you're going to involve. And we'll get to the rules in the later segment. Depending on how complex your system is, you might be able to handle defining everything about an area. But on the other hand, you might not. So be careful with divergent settings. But that's a little bit different.
Please be very cautious.
Yeah. Anyway. Right. Yeah, this has been a Mooks and Monsters. Yeah,
this has been a Mooks and Monsters. You can find us on mentalcellarpublications.com. You can email us at podcast@mentalcellarpublications.com. Follow both of us on Twitter. I'm at StageHat. Tim's at TNaderWriter. You can find this podcast on Stitcher, iTunes, etc. And we've been hosted by Libsyn.
And we're available, and you can find us on Facebook. Facebook.com/Mooks and Monsters. Yeah. Thanks for listening, everybody.